Hey everyone, welcome back to Red Pen Revision. Today's lesson we're going to be learning about the structure and function of plant, animal and bacterial cells and then apply this learning to some past paper style questions. The first thing we're going to do is define these three terms. Eukaryotes are cells with a nucleus. And you may be thinking, well, what's a nucleus? We're going to actually define this term as well and give a bit more detail in a second. A prokaryote is a cell without a nucleus. And these two bits of information you really need to try and remember for your exam because there's lots of questions which we'll look at that kind of refer to the nucleus as well. Organelles are basically structures which make up that cell. It's just a fancy way of saying a structure. So if we begin to look at the first two cells on our screen, you can see that these are both eukaryotes, and this is because they both contain something called a nucleus. So a nucleus is an organelle which contains something called DNA, and DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's basically just the genetic code. It tells that cell what it's going to be. So in this case, we have a plant cell at the top and we have an animal cell at the bottom of your page. And we ourselves as human beings, we mainly are only made up of animal cells. So let's look a little bit into the structures of these cells. How did I first of all know that this was a plant cell and not an animal cell? They both contain a nucleus. How did I know the difference? You can see we've got this really big structure in the center of our plant cell, and this is what we call a vacuole. Now, the vacuole contains something called cell sap, which is where loads of sugars and salts and liquid goes into that cell and allows that plant cell to use these sugars and salts for various reactions. So it's a big storage system. We've also got a structure in a plant cell called a chloroplast. Now, a chloroplast contains something called chlorophyll. Lots of vocabulary here, as you probably will already notice. But a chloroplast contains a pigment or a green dye called chlorophyll. Sometimes it's referred to as a chemical as well. And together, these are used in a process called photosynthesis, and I can do a lesson on that at some point as well. The other structure that's very unique and only found in plant cells is the cell wall. The cell wall is made up of a protein called cellulose, and you do need to know this as well. And this allows the plant to be turgid or strong and structured, as you may have noticed, because it's got a kind of square shape to it. Now, there's lots of other things inside a plant cell, and the only other way to do this is to talk about it in conjunction with an animal cell, because a plant and animal cell share these structures, share these organelles. So you can see we've got another structure here found also in an animal cell, and this is what we call the mitochondria. Now, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. You may have heard this term before. Essentially, it means that it produces energy, or it releases energy. And that cell can use that energy in the form of ATP to do the various chemical reactions it needs to do. There's also these structures here in both plant and animal cells. And what these are called ribosomes. And they're usually found on another structure called the endoplasmic reticulum. But for GCSE, you don't really need to know that. You just need to know about the word ribosome. Ribosomes are all to do with protein synthesis. And the word synthesis just means the assembly or making something from smaller parts. So proteins are made by ribosomes. The other structure you need to know is the cell membrane of both cells. So both animal and plant cells have a cell membrane, and this is to allow substances in and out. And this is a really important part of the cell, because sometimes cells want things to come into the cell, such as water and proteins, and it wants to release various substances as well. However, it wants to be selective about what can come in and out. Imagine the cell is like your house. You only let certain people into your house, don't you? You don't just want any random person in your house, which is what that cell membrane is for. And the last thing that we're going to talk about is a structure called cytoplasm. Now, the cytoplasm is a jelly-like fluid, and this is where all the reactions take place inside the cell, and where lots of different products that are made from the cell get transported into and out of. And that's really all the structures that you need to know about at GCSE. So those are our plant and animal cells. Now, if you go on to the next page, we can see we've got something called a prokaryotic cell, or a prokaryote. And this is usually talking about bacterial cells. And you can see it's very different in structure to the plant and animal cells, because there's something here that I want to talk about, this spaghetti-like structure. And this is what we call free DNA. This basically means that DNA that would have been found in a nucleus, okay, usually is put into a nucleus, is actually free to move within that cell. So we don't have a nucleus in a prokaryotic cell. The reason for this actually is because if you think about bacteria, they divide really quickly. That's the whole point of them. They want to divide and replicate very, very quickly. So if that DNA has to get out of that nucleus and unwind itself, it's going to take a long time to do that. So bacterial cells actually just want its DNA open and free. So, it can actually copy its DNA and copy sections of the DNA, such as genes, to actually enable it to replicate quicker. So it's actually a positive thing. That's why bacterial cells has this. We've also got another structure, and you can see we've got 3 of them in this diagram. These are called plasmids. Now, plasmids are DNA. Okay, they are a type of DNA, and it's an extra piece of DNA. So in addition to the DNA that the bacterial cell has, it also has a plasmid. And plasmids are really useful for the bacteria because they usually have something called antibiotic resistance genes on them. So antibiotic resistance genes allow that bacteria to sometimes prevent being killed by antibiotics. So antibiotics are drugs that are used to kill bacteria. And we'll talk more about this in future lessons as well. So let's have a look at some past paper questions. You can see these are some previous questions that students may have done before. A lot of the time they're asking you to recall information, which is great for this topic because it's quite a lot of just keywords that you need to remember. So it says here, name structure A and B by choosing the correct words from the box. So we've got A up here and B is this structure here. Pause the video so you can answer it and then we can go through. Okay, now that you've unpaused, we've got structure A. This is, of course, a big circle that we recognise as the nucleus. And structure B, this has to be an animal cell. We recognise that from the shape. So this is what we're going to call our cell membrane. It can't be the cell wall because this is an animal cell. And we would have noticed this because this animal cell does not have any of the hallmarks of a plant cell, such as a vacuole, chloroplast, cell wall, etc. The next question, it says, this question is about the cell cycle. Chromosomes are copied during the cell cycle. Where are chromosomes found? Now, I've not actually mentioned the word chromosome today, but I did want to just bring this to your attention. I mentioned the word DNA. Now, DNA is absolutely huge. If you were to unravel it in one cell, it would go to like the moon and back. Crazy, crazy long, really huge. DNA can't fit into a tiny cell. If you think of a cell, it's microscopic. We can't see it with the naked eye. So how on earth does all that information fit into not only the cell, but into the smallest nucleus? How does that fit? DNA is actually wound into a double helix shape. Also, this double helix is actually wound into something called chromosomes. And you may have come across this before. So chromosomes are where our DNA is found, and as we know, DNA is found in the nucleus. Okay, next type of questions. Let's have a look. It says living organisms are made of cells. Animal and plant cells have several parts. Each part has a different function. Draw one line from each. Pause the video now to have a go on your own. Okay, so let's have a look. We've got cell membrane. What is the role? It controls the activities of the cell. It controls the movement of substances in and out of the cell, where most energy is released in respiration, where proteins are made. I agree with the second one. In and out of the cell. The mitochondria. Okay, so the mitochondria, as I said, was the powerhouse of the cell. It's where energy is released. And they've given us extra information. That energy is released in the process called respiration. We'll talk more about that in previous lessons to come. And the nucleus is what controls the activities of the cells. This one, where proteins are made, that is ribosomes. Okay, anytime you're talking about proteins or protein assembly, protein synthesis, we're talking about ribosomes. Next question. Pause the video to have a go on your own. Okay, now you've unpaused, let's have a quick look. We've got some key words at the bottom. We can see A is the outer section of this bacterial cell. It must be the cell wall. You've also got a jelly-like fluid section inside the bacteria, so it's going to be the cytoplasm. And then you can see we've got our extra loop of DNA. This is going to be our plasmid. Chloroplasts, there aren't really any unless they are specifically asking for that. And that's everything. That's great. Okay. Cell membrane would just be this structure here, just after the cell wall. Remember, cell membrane comes first, then it's the cell wall. Okay, last question. Pause to have a go on your own as well. Okay, now that you've unpaused, let's have a go at these questions. So, which two parts in the diagram above are not found in animal cells? So these questions are all to do with comparing animal cells to plant cells and bacterial cells. So which two parts of the diagram above are not found in animal cells? You should have said chloroplast and cell wall for these two questions here. Give one difference between the structure of a bacterial cell and an animal cell. You could have mentioned plasmids, or you could have mentioned no nucleus in bacterial cells. And name one structure that is found in a plant cell but not found in a bacterial cell or an animal cell. So what is only found in plant cells but not in bacterial animal? You could have said the vacuole. I would always usually go with vacuole for this one because sometimes you can have a cell wall. You probably are best to go with vacuole for this question. Okay, I hope that helped you. Please let me know if there's any further questions you'd like me to go through or any topics. Have a great day and good luck with your revision.